Hello everyone and welcome back to TowerGate. It is day 211, October the 4th, 2017, Wednesday. Thank you so much for tuning in. Obviously today we're going to focus on the topic that everyone is still talking about, that being the aftermath of the shooting in Las Vegas. Now I know it's a sensitive topic right now. There may be people watching this video who lost a loved one or a friend in that attack, or possibly has someone fighting for their life in the hospital right now. There was over 500 people taken to the hospital, so I know there's a lot of people affected by this. And if you're watching my video, I just want you to know that I'm in no way, shape, or form trying to profit in any way or advance my own cause in any way on the back of this topic. But it is what everyone's talking about. And I have subscribers to my YouTube channel that are probably, I would assume, interested to know what my thoughts are on everything that happened here. As those of you who subscribe to my channel, or for those of you who are just watching this video, as you'll notice, I have absolutely no ads that run on my videos. I do not have a Patreon account. I have never asked for a single penny in donations from anyone. I do not make a single red cent from making these videos. And as far as understanding the amount of pain and suffering that people would be going through who may know someone or who is just deeply affected by what has happened, I'm going to share something with you now that I've never said before on any of my TowerGate videos. And that is that I can understand your pain personally, because it was about 4.5 years ago, 2 days after Father's Day, that my father took his life with a 9mm semi-automatic handgun. 2 days after Father's Day, which is the last time I saw him on Father's Day, 2 days after that, he got up early in the morning, which he normally did. He went down in the basement and he placed the gun against his chest and pulled the trigger. My mother was sleeping upstairs in the bedroom upstairs above. We never figured out exactly why he did it, and to this day we don't really know why he did it. But I certainly understand how you feel, because we were all certainly devastated by this, and I know what it's like to stand around the hospital bed to watch someone die, because he lived for about 6 hours. They air carried him to University Hospital here in Cincinnati. We all got down to the hospital, and he was on life support. But after about 6 hours, the doctor just explained to my mom that even if they did give him a few extra months to live, he would be in a nursing home and would not be even, he would be a vegetable essentially. So she decided that the best thing to do was to let him go. So yeah, I do understand what it's like to lose someone you love in a very tragic way, without any knowledge whatsoever that anything was going to happen. A sudden type death of someone you love in a tragic and violent way, it's very difficult, and I understand this firsthand. Now, having said this, let me give you my thoughts on what's going on here. Now, obviously, it's too soon after the fact that we don't have all the facts in. So all we have right now is just a bunch of variables, a bunch of factors that we can look at and try to maybe understand a little more about what may be going on here. Well, among the factors, of course, we know the shooter's name was Stephen Paddock. He was a Las Vegas resident. He was 64 years old. Apparently was single, had a girlfriend, which we'll be talking about. We know there's 59 dead and 520 some odd wounded. I don't know if all their injuries are related from gunshot fire. Some may have been run over in a stampede or what have you, but we don't know. There's over 500 people that are in hospital recovering from various injuries. There's a lot of people talking about the fact that, he seemed like the normal guy. His brother has done an interview on the radio stating, hey, he was not political, he was not religious, he just a regular guy. I can't believe he would do this. This just doesn't make any sense. And that's really all we have as far as someone who knows him. There have been a couple people call into radio shows who knew him, neighbors and things like that, who say the exact same thing, that they would never have any idea that this individual would do something like that. Now, generally, when we're faced with this situation, the obvious fallback position for most people is to say, well, he must have just snapped. Just one of the moments when this person snapped. It does happen. certainly people can just snap. No question about it. And there's also another theory out there of the crazy gene, which is to say that some people have this like gene in them that at any time can go off. Now we know that the shooter's father was on the FBI's 10 most wanted list. He was a bank robber and a con man. He was said to be by the FBI dangerous, possibly somewhat psychotic, and even suicidal. So it's possible that maybe Mr. Paddock inherited his father's crazy gene, and maybe it just went off. So it's a possibility. We also know, of course, he was a gambler. He described himself as a professional gambler. We know that he was a multimillionaire, assets somewhere in the $2 to $3 million range. Seemed to live a pretty good life. He loved to gamble. That was his hobby. He did a lot of traveling. He was living there in Las Vegas. Obviously, people described him as being, just a normal guy. So there's nothing that you can find really, as far as we can know now, is troubling in his background, or he didn't. As far as we know, he didn't just lose a lot of money. We know that he made $10,000 to $30,000 worth of bets in the week prior. But for a guy with a couple $1 million who probably won sometimes and lost sometimes, no one is stating that he lost some large amount of money, or that he actually had a gambling problem that was so bad that he would bet away his entire fortune. Apparently he didn't do that because he was a professional gambler. My guess is he had ways of knowing when he was having a bad day to walk away or something, but we have no reason to believe that he had some great gambling loss that caused him to go nutty. We know that he had recently wired $100,000 to an account in the Philippines, and it appears that his girlfriend may have made her way to the Philippines via Japan. Now in Japan they do have an extradition treaty with the United States, but only if the person's actually been criminally charged, not just someone been accused. They would actually have to file charges before Japan would extradite her. So it's a little confusing to me now as to whether or not she's still in Japan or whether she actually has arrived in the Philippines. We can assume the money was wired to the Philippines for her benefit. It's really hard to know. Maybe he was planning on joining her there. It's really hard to know. We just don't know. We know that Mr. Paddock previously worked for Lockheed Martin. Of course, we know Lockheed Martin, part of the industrial complex, the military industrial complex, close association with the intelligence community. We know that he was an IRS agent for about a decade or so. And of course, we know they're part of the deep state, and they have connections in the intelligence agencies as well. We know that he was a licensed pilot and had two aircraft, two planes. And we're even learning that he was a country music fan, which is kind of strange because it was a country music concert that he is alleged to have fired upon. We know that he had it's being reported, I should say, by LA, Las Vegas law enforcement, that they found two bump triggers. These bump triggers dramatically increase a semi-automatic weapon's rate of fire. It allows the natural recoil of the weapon to bump the shooter's finger so that you can increase the rate of fire on the weapon. And these are, by the way, legal in Nevada. They allegedly found 23 firearms, 2 that had scopes on them, and they were rifles, also on tripods, hundreds of rounds of unspent ammunition, as well as we can assume at least 1,000 rounds or more of ammunition that he did fire. Of course, his brother, as I mentioned, already said that Mr. Paddock was not a gun enthusiast, as far as he knew, not a political person or even religious. We know the police are stating that they found explosives both in his home and his car, or the ingredients to make an explosive, that specifically being ammonium nitrate, both in his car and home. Also, he had set up surveillance cameras in the hallway and inside the room. It appears that he recorded some video before shooting and also recorded the entire event. There are some things that we don't know that we need to know. We need to get the toxicology report to find out what was in his system. We need to know what was on that video that he shot. A lot of times people will leave a suicide note. They haven't mentioned finding any suicide note, but if he made some video before he started the shooting and then videotaped the entire shooting, and probably some time after the shooting where he is alleged to have taken his own life, there's probably some information on that video that we may find out what he was thinking. We have a couple strange reports of a person and her boyfriend who about 45 minutes prior to the shooting was standing down front in the front couple rows telling people that they were going to die. And she apparently started some sort of an altercation with another woman. She was apparently removed by security. This is very familiar. We saw the same thing in the Kennedy assassination, the Oklahoma City bombing, and in 9/11. I guess at this point my thoughts are that there's just not enough information to know at this point exactly what in the world is going on. But when you look at the shooter, the alleged shooter, it's hard to imagine someone who apparently had everyone fooled into believing he was just a regular average guy, didn't have any particular affiliations with religious or political organizations, wasn't political, wasn't particularly religious, that he would just for no reason in the world, especially a man who seemed to be enjoying his retirement, had plenty of money, was doing what he loved to do, had a girlfriend. It just seems awfully strange that he would, 4 days prior to this event, get a hotel room and then start bringing in suitcases full of guns, setting up the situation, and then carrying out this tragic, horrific event. It makes you scratch your head and wonder exactly what's going on. It's in my nature to be curious, and because I do know about the deep state, and I do understand that the FBI is the investigative unit now handling this, and we know about what their involvement is with the deep state and the types of operations that they engage in, particularly operations like Operation Gladio and things and such. We know that it's not out of the realm for this to be some sort of a government operation, although I'm not stating I believe that's what happened. I just don't know at this point. We need more information. But there's a lot of signals here, a lot of signals flashing in my mind that being of a curious nature, that I need some more information. I'll tell you a couple things that trouble me at this point. Number one, obviously, the at least one person, possibly more, warning that there was something about to happen. Again, we saw this in 9/11, Oklahoma City, and other events. We have the devices that the FBI confiscated, computer, cell phone, BlackBerry, things like that, that they confiscated but have not yet had a chance to look at. This video that he shot prior to and during and possibly after the event, yet they have not had a chance to look at that. They have not had enough time to interview a lot of witnesses. But for some strange reason, and this is what makes me curious, and again, just like 9/11 and many of these other events, almost immediately after the situation ends, before there's been any time for any real investigation of witnesses or electronic devices or anything else, they automatically have the conclusion. And it's always the same. Just like in JFK and everything else, it's a lone wolf shooter. One guy, not connected to anything. Even though Antifa has now come out and stated that this woman he was with was one of their people, and she apparently had gotten him radicalized with the Antifa thing. We have Al-Qaeda on two separate occasions now, two different elements of Al-Qaeda, or ISIS, now coming out and saying he was one of their people and even had a Muslim name, had converted to Muslim, whatever. The thing about it is, these are all things that confuse the issue, but the most important thing to take away from this is that I'm always curious whenever you have a horrific event like this, and immediately before the event is even completed, the law enforcement comes out and tells us that they have the crime solved. They're absolutely sure before they've interviewed the witnesses, before they've looked at the videotape, the digital devices, before they've gone through all the information, before they've had enough time to even really do any investigation. They already seem to have it all solved. They've got it all sewn up. I remember on the morning of 9/11, after the second plane hit the tower, within 5 minutes there were people all over all the networks. The last two planes hadn't even hit their targets yet we had everyone, one right after another, on every network. All the experts were there. They had it all figured out. They had it all solved. By dinner time, they had the names of all these individuals, even though names never even appeared on any of the boarding passes on any of the airlines. They had their pictures, which they already had up on TV by dinner time. This is very, very common. Whenever I see that the investigation has already been solved while the crime is still literally playing itself out, I get very skeptical. I get very skeptical of these types of things. Because, as many of you know, when you have a murder or serious crime in your community, the police are asking for help. They generally tell you what little they know at that point, but they certainly don't come out and make finalistic statements about what did or did not happen. They say, we're still continuing the investigation. We're going to have to do an investigation. The investigation will be ongoing. Things like that. They don't come out and reach a conclusion within minutes or hours of events like this going down, unless it's clearly obvious what happened. But even then, they want to dig into it, investigate further to see if there may be something else going on. I'm always skeptical with this government when they solve the entire crime and give us the narrative immediately after the event goes down, or sometimes, as in this case and in 9/11, as it's still happening. They got it all figured out. So, I don't consider myself a conspiracy theorist, although conspiracies do happen. And when you're talking about the deep state, you always have to ask yourself, who benefits? Who benefited from this exercise? I don't see how Mr. Paddock benefited. He was a multimillionaire with a pilot's license, a couple airplanes, had a couple nice homes, plenty of money, loved to gamble, had a girlfriend. Seemed like he had a pretty damn good life. Why would he end it all the way that he did for no apparent reason? He just snapped. I don't know. Generally, it requires something to set someone off, to trigger that snap. Guy gets fired from his job, goes back and shoots up the place. Guy gets cut off in traffic, pulls out a gun without thinking and starts shooting at somebody. Guy walks in and sees his wife in bed with another man, whips out his gun and starts shooting. Generally, things trigger people emotionally to take some sort of a act like this. But this was planned, cold, and calculated. And it's hard to find anything here that would give us any reason to believe that. Now, maybe we need to wait and get more information from his girlfriend, who he apparently had been with since early in the spring. Some people say in March or April of 2017 he met this woman. Antifa says she's one of their people. Of course, sometimes intelligence agencies will use a woman to get to someone like Mr. Paddock. He would be a very good target if you were an intelligence agency looking for a patsy or someone like that. This guy would certainly maybe fit the bill. It appears that this woman, his girlfriend, may have been a world traveler. She liked to do a lot of traveling. It appears that she may have traveled to Beirut and some other places in the Middle East, which maybe she has some affiliation with some terrorist-type organizations. We just don't know. This is why I'm saying, how can they write off that this had nothing to do with international terrorism or Antifa or anything else, any right-wing groups, left-wing groups, what have you? They've got it all solved. They've got it all figured out. He wasn't part of any of that. Lone wolf shooter. Despite the fact that we have all these things which need to be looked into. And they still haven't looked at the video. Maybe he tells us on the video why he did it and what he was thinking. They haven't looked at that video yet. Yet they've already got the conclusion drawn. So I don't know what happened. And because this investigation is being handled by the FBI and we are learning more and more every day about why we cannot trust these people, we know what they're part of. We also know this happened in Las Vegas, where organized crime still has a pretty lofty role in what happens in that town. We also know about the long, close relationship between the intelligence agencies and organized crime going all the way back to the early 1950s. Clearly, both the mafia and the CIA were involved in the Kennedy assassination. Many of these assassins that work for the mafia also work for the CIA. They work for anybody who pay them. My gut at this point is that if this was as it is being played out, if what we are seeing, what we are being told is true, and there's no other thing going on here, no terrorist ties, no Antifa, no left or right wing groups, no political motivation, no religious motivation, if this was just a guy who just for whatever reason decided to start shooting up the place, killing people like that, and then taking his own life, if that is really what happened here, then the only thing I have to take disagreement with is that the idea that he just snapped. I would, at this point, if that is the story, that everything that we see is really what happened, then I would have to think the opposite is true, that he didn't just snap. I would have to think that because everything seems so premeditated, so carefully well organized, that it's more likely, rather than him snapping, that he's always been a person with a dark soul, that he's always been a person of evil, and what he's actually been doing, because he's apparently a very intelligent man as well, he was putting on a fake act that he was a nice, regular, average guy, when in fact he wasn't a nice, average, honest guy. I don't believe he snapped. I believe he was either one of two. He was either really just a bad individual who was putting on an act that he was a nice guy, or he's got some connections, or maybe he was used as a patsy or something else. Something going on here. I don't believe that he just snapped. Something else going on here. I just don't know what it is. I guess in the days, in the weeks to follow, we will learn more, as we always do. We certainly need to learn more about this woman he had been with. For someone who did not have any interest in weapons, for someone who we're being told was not particularly a gun enthusiast. This guy sure had a lot of guns, explosives. Doesn't make any sense. That's an awful lot of firearms. 23 firearms in the hotel. Scoped rifles, 1 automatic. Bumper triggers. Explosives. Some people are reporting that they did find Antifa or some sort of radical left-wing propaganda around his home, maybe in the hotel room, but that's not being reported by the corporate media or by the FBI. That's just what some people are saying on the internet. I'm not sure where that got started, but it's out there. But to me, there's a lot more here than meets the eye, and there always is. Even if this is pretty much as advertised, there's a lot more here than meets the eye. We definitely need to see that toxicology report to know what he may have been taking. Of course, there are things that you can inject people with that cannot be detected in a standard autopsy. They generally empty the contents of your stomach and take a blood test. There are some things that you have to go beyond that. You actually have to withdraw spinal fluid or something like that. That's generally not a procedure you do in a normal autopsy. So there we are. This is basically what we know, what we don't know, what's being alleged, what has been proved, what has not been proved, what's been learned, what has not been learned. The questions that have been answered are nowhere near the amount of questions that have not been answered and are not being asked by the mainstream media. Again, as in all these cases, an event happens, you are immediately given the narrative, then the crime is immediately solved, and anyone who asks any questions is a conspiracy theorist. That is how it goes every single time. So we will continue to follow the story, and maybe we'll learn more, but it won't come from the authorities. What we will get from the authorities is doubling down on the story. It will never change. Once the story comes out and they've laid down that narrative, no matter how much evidence comes into the contrary, they will never back off the original story. We saw that with 9/11, after the collapse of World Trade Center 7, when everyone looked at the video and said, wait a minute, buildings like that don't fall like that. They have to be exploded to fall like that. And there was no planes that hit that building, and we are told that there was no demolitions used, yet the building collapsed at free fall speed, just like a deck of cards. Can't happen. But they already locked in their narrative, and they'll never change it. There'll be calls for investigations, there'll be calls for hearings, and eventually they'll be called for a commission. Remember, investigations are to get to the truth of a crime. Commissions are to cover up crimes. We always get a commission when there's a cover-up. Expect a commission coming your way soon. Lots of questions here. Maybe everything is just as we're being told, but maybe it's not. I would be interested to learn more from people who are in the audience, because I've been looking at some video, and I can tell you from my military experience that when you fire a semi-automatic weapon, a rifle, at night, there's a hell of a lot of flash. Lights up the sky. There's a hell of a lot of flash around the muzzle of a weapon that's firing, especially a 223 firing thousands of rounds. That barrel gets mighty damn hot. Probably was glowing red by the time he finished. Yet, in the video that I was looking at, where people were holding up their cell phones towards that broken window where he had broken the window out with hammers, I'm looking up in the window. I'm hearing semi-automatic weapon, or actually automatic weapon fire is what it sounded like. It was ba 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 ba. Too even to be semi-auto, and to get that kind of chatter out of your weapon on it'll fire as fast as you'll pull the trigger, but I know from doing it that you can't be that consistent. It sounded like an automatic weapon, and we know he had at least one, and we know he had a bumper trigger, but bumper triggers don't sound that even. They'll be kind of, they'll be stutters. No stutters. What I heard was, automatic weapon fire. Absolutely. So, there are people saying they heard it come from different directions. Well, when you're in an area where there's all that report going on, it's kind of hard to tell. It can sometimes sound like multiple shooters. Maybe there was multiple shooters, but you can't really go off that because there's just too many echoes and too many reverberations, too much report bouncing off buildings and stuff. It's almost impossible to tell by ear. That's why the military uses special devices to tell where shots are coming from. But I was looking up into that window as I was hearing all those rounds go off. I saw no muzzle flash whatsoever. None. That window was dark. If there was someone shooting out of that window, believe me, I've seen live fire at night. It's bright orange, and every time that round goes off, there's a flash. We should have been seeing a mini fireworks show coming out of that window, that darkened window. At the same time you're hearing the shots, there should have been flashes coming out of that window. Now maybe I just am not seeing them. Maybe from the camera phone that someone was using, they're not visible. Maybe people on the ground will contradict that and say, oh yeah, I was on the ground, I was looking up the window, you could definitely see the flashes that coming out of the window. That would be something I would expect to hear. But if we continue to move further and we can't find anyone who can say, oh yeah, we were looking up at that broken window and you couldn't see any flashes, at that point you got to start asking some very, very serious questions, because I'm assuring you, even with we use the little flash suppressors, those little flash suppressors, even with the flash suppressor, you are going to get some flash. There's no way you can totally stop the flash at all. So that concerns me a little bit. But primarily what concerns me is that the FBI spokesman who came out shortly after the event, basically came out and said, "Oh, one shooter, lone wolf shooter. No, we're not. No, it's not connected to a terrorist group. No, it's not connected to this or that." It's too soon. And we're talking about the FBI here, not Barney Fife. The FBI should know that you never come out, or any law enforcement agency, you never come out and tell people, hey, this is exactly what happened, when you haven't even completed the investigation, haven't interviewed any witnesses, haven't reviewed the digital devices and stuff. They hadn't even looked at this video that he had set up. I mean, maybe he made a confession speech before he started firing. We just don't know. But at this point, I would have to say there's some things here that look fishy to me, and I am curious. I do have some questions. I don't know what did happen here exactly, but I do have a lot of questions, and I'm sure a lot of you do as well. I'd be interested in the comments section of anyone who can add anything to this, or if you have some correction of any statement of fact I've made, please correct me if anything I said was wrong. If you have any additional information to add, please add it in the comments section. We would all appreciate it. Should also note that I was very disappointed but not surprised to see the rotten Reverend Clinton, come out and immediately make a statement politicizing the event. Not only did she politicize the event to push for silencers, which is in itself a joke. How often do you see people use silencers in these situations? Rarely. Hardly ever. Never. These people generally expect that they're going to be captured and probably killed. Usually they kill themselves just as the cops are getting there, like this guy is alleged to have done. Another thing about silencers is silencers are really misnamed. They shouldn't be called a silencer. They don't silence totally the sound of the weapon. They muffle to some degree the sound of the weapon, but they really don't silence the weapon. You can still hear, certainly especially, at 223, 30 floors up, with the echo of all them buildings. You still would have heard the firing. You can hear the weapons that were used in the Kennedy assassination that had, because some of those weapons did have silencers, and they're also the ones that missed their targets. Because one of the shot that was fired that missed the limousine, that hit the curb and then flew up and hit Mr. Teague in the side of the face and cut his cheek, that was from one of the weapons that had a silencer on it. And if you listen to the dictaphone belt police recording of that motorcycle policeman that had his dictaphone belt, had his microphone open, that picked up the sounds of the Kennedy assassination, you can clearly hear the 4 shots from the weapons that were not silenced, but you can also hear at least a half dozen, maybe 7 shots that you could hear in there that were fired from weapons with silencers. They just make a popping sound, but it's just very muffled. But you can definitely hear them. You can see JFK turn around and look at one point when he hears one of them popping sounds. Probably saw some turf fly up or something. And I can only assume at this point that the rotten Reverend has been watching too many Jason Bourne movies, and she believes that when you see in the movies where the hitman grabs the high-powered weapon and then screws this big silencer on the end, and then he fires the weapon, and all you hear is like a poof. No, my friends, it doesn't work that way. It's a lot louder than that. It's remember, the silencer, to the degree that it silences the sound of the weapon, it also reduces the power of the weapon itself and the muzzle velocity, the speed by which the bullet's going to travel, and it's also going to affect the trajectory of the round, how the round's going to travel, makes it less accurate. That's why professional assassins generally do not use a silencer unless they're going to be within 10 feet of the guy that they're going to shoot. Only if they're at very close range do they use a silencer. You don't use a silencer for long-range shooting on a rifle, especially when you're going to be firing in the automatic mode, because these silencers create a tremendous amount of friction, and it doesn't take long before you build up tremendous amounts of heat in the silencer itself, and it just becomes it's not effective, because after it gets really hot, the stuff that makes the silencer silence the sound, it just gets blown away. It just gets melted away. The silencer will literally melt. If you were to put a silencer on an automatic weapon like were alleged to have been used here, that ba 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 ba, you squeeze off a few of those and that silencer is going to be red hot. So I don't believe it. And the rotten reverend is despicable. Absolutely despicable. Thank you so much for